Right, good afternoon, members and members of the public. Welcome to this afternoon's Licensing and Regulatory Committee. First of all, declarations of interest. Any member got any interest that they would like to declare? Brilliant. Item 2 is minutes.
I'm really sorry, Chair. I did have my hand up.
Sorry.
My virtual hand, sorry.
Okay,
maybe I should have put my actual hand up.
Yeah, just shout. Go on.
Sorry about that. I mean, it's actually not a conflict of interest, but I just wanted to mention, for the sake of full transparency, that I do work in hospitality. So in terms of agenda item 6, talking about licensed premises reopening, I do work in that industry. But I'm not affected by anything discussed in the report, and it's not a decision making anyway. It's just to update information, so I don't think it's necessary to remove myself from that discussion. Thanks.
Brilliant. And while Councillor Melly says that, I'll welcome Councillor Melly as our new vice chair of this committee from now on. So you're very welcome to your new role.
At that point, Chair, sorry, is it right if I just thank Councillor Wells for her work in this role up until now, and wish her a swift recovery back to full health?
Yeah, no, I can echo that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wells. Right, so minutes of the last meeting. Anybody got any issues with the minutes, or any clarification or points they want to raise? Okay, I shall sign those at appropriate time. Just before we get to public participation, the item we're going to be taking on an update of the interpretation of out-of-town taxis or private hire vehicles. Unfortunately, the police aren't able to make it tonight. So what I'm proposing to do is that we defer that agenda item to the next meeting that the police can be present at. Because we've already published the papers when we knew the police couldn't make it, it meant that we couldn't just defer it without having to ask for your permission, so to speak. So I wonder if we can just have a show of hands of everybody that's happy to do that. Fantastic. Thank you all very much.
Chair, just in relation to that then, if it's going to be some while before the police attend, could you make the request of the police that they bring along the legal opinion that they obtained, and even at the very least, if the committee had to go into private session, we get to see the legal opinion that the police obtained, because I requested it under an FOI request of the police and was denied seeing that opinion. I really think we need to see it.
I would love to see it as well, and they wouldn't share a copy with me even privately without it going to the wider committee. So it's disappointing, but I suppose that is their legal privilege, I'm sure. But I will certainly put that forward, that we'd like to see a copy when we write to them, invite them to the next meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other comments on that before we move on? Well, right, that takes us over to public participation. We've got 2 people speaking tonight, so I'll introduce the first person, which is Ian Mitchell, and I'll say, or I'll preface both the public speakers. Both public speakers are going to talk about obviously how trading is being done now, and particularly around pavement cafe licenses. Members will probably be aware that technically pavement cafe licenses is a highway issue. However, I've allowed both of these people to speak because I think what they've got to say is important, and obviously officers will be able to pick up some of the kind of technicalities around who does what when we get to that update. But if Ian Mitchell can go first, please. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight, Chair, and hello to the rest of the committee. My concerns are around the public cafe licensing, and I know that doesn't necessarily fit this remit, but I think there has to be some kind of reconciliation of how licensing is devolved when it comes to that. It's unprecedented times that we're living in, unfortunately, and lockdown restrictions mean that anybody that has a license also has to have a cafe license so that people can actually participate in their socialising on the streets. This has reduced the street as far as accessibility goes for blind and partially sighted people. And I know this might change on the 17th of May and people might be allowed in to partake of their beverages, but there's still also something that appears in the report under item 6, which does talk about additional seating being provided where people can take and consume their takeaway meals and things like that. So what we are actually sort of acknowledging is that public seating is being set up in places that weren't really an obstacle before. I don't need to tell you that for blind and partially sighted people, but for people with other disabilities, being able to navigate your way around additional seating can be a problem. I'd also like to sort of openly acknowledge what City of York Council officers are finding, and that is that they're dealing with a high level of non-compliance amongst patrons who are moving outside designated seating areas with their chairs and tables, making any sort of equal impact assessment redundant, basically, and causing a risk to not only blind and partially sighted residents, but also to wheelchair users and other disability groups that have mobility issues. I think this is made worse in narrow areas such as Castlegate and Fossgate, and in particularly busy areas such as Micklegate. I read that the council do have powers to ensure that this situation could be tackled, but are reluctant to do so. And I'll quote what I've actually read, and that is, it would have a significant impact on the license's financial viability, and therefore we keep reminding them of their duties and speak to them when breaches are identified. I have one question to ask, and that is, do committee members consider that this response is adequate in ensuring that the disabled and vulnerable members of the city's community are actually safeguarded by that measure and have equal rights to access and navigate around the foot street safely and without hindrance? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. We'll come to your comments when we get to that paper. The next speaker is Anna Baldwin. Anna, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
I'm like Ian, I'm partially sighted. In fact, I'm severely sight impaired, and I speak on behalf also of the Disability Rights Forum. And we're rather surprised that there appears to be no equality issues in the report which is before you. I just want to give you the experience of walking down Castlegate as a blind person. There are places where the two sides of the road, the pavement cafe furniture, almost meets in the middle. I don't see how a disabled person in a wheelchair can get down, let alone somebody with a guide dog or me with my long cane. And this is the sort of situation which I think in the joyful situation of the summer is only going to get worse. It's very nice that people are eating outside, and I don't think this will stop, but it does mean that there should be very clear implementation of the cafe furniture guidelines and licensing requirements for barriers. The barriers at the moment are supposed to be at each end of the tables and chairs place, but they should actually surround the tables and chairs, and there should be a requirement that the way through should be at least 2 meters. I would like also to make it clear that the carriageway of a foot street acts as a pavement. So to just talk about pavement cafes is rather misleading, because most of these developments are in the foot streets, and rightly so. And it is much easier in a wheelchair to go down the carriageway when there's no traffic than to try and negotiate going up and down the pavement. So there needs to be a straight way through between the different pavement cafes, and there needs to be a decent amount of width, and there needs to be compliance that the waiters are not going across with their hot drinks and causing another additional hazard that way. I would like to respectfully suggest that maybe we should think of licensing the street rather than licensing the cafe for the street furniture, but I know that's not what your committee does. However, as Ian says, they should work together, these two sorts of license, the street furniture license and the beverage license, because the implications of both are really quite dangerous for blind and disabled people. I couldn't possibly go down to Castlegate or Fossgate on my own anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. And hopefully you can continue to listen to the meeting, and hopefully you'll hear some more discussion around some of the points you've raised when we get to that item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. I think one thing I might have missed was apologies. So just to give some apologies, Councillor Myers and Councillor Hunter are both unable to join us. Right, that takes us to item 4, which is Hackney Carriage fare increase request. So Leslie, can I hand over to you to introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report is asking members to determine a request from the Hackney Carriage Associations with regards to the maximum fare to be paid in respect of the hire of one of our Hackney Carriage vehicles. And this relates to a table of fares for City of York Hackney Carriage vehicles only. There is provisions in the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976 that allows councils to fix and vary the rates with regards to their Hackney Carriage vehicles. This is known as a table of fares and more commonly known as the fare chart. The current table of fares that was fixed by the council was done so in June 2018, and a copy of that can be found at Annex 1. The details in paragraph 6 of the report cover that the table of fares deals with 5 tariffs. We've got 3 standard tariffs and 2 premium rate tariffs, as well as extras that can be applied. At the beginning of each year, the council provides the associations with the results of the Hackney Carriage fare inflation calculations, and what's covered in those calculations is detailed at paragraph 8. And the calculations for the previous 4 years are detailed at paragraph 9. It's for the Hackney Carriage Associations to determine if they're going to approach the council to request an increase in their fares. The associations did not request an increase in 2019. They did request an increase in February 2020. However, due to COVID restrictions, they didn't provide any further details and they didn't move that request forward. In February 2021, the associations have submitted requests for a 4% increase, with the proposed fare details provided of how they would like the variations to be applied, and that can be found at Annex 2. They submitted a proposed table of fares. With regards to consultation, prior to submitting the request to ourselves, the association did consult with their members. It's also a legal requirement that the council must publish the table of fares and give a specified period for which objections can be made, and that has to be no less than 14 days. If there are no objections to the table of fares, the table of fares applies. If there are any objections, they have to be taken into consideration, and we have 2 months as a council to do that before we can set the table of fares. The comparisons of the current table of fares and the proposed table can be found at paragraph 19 of the report, and I can confirm that the proposed table of fares is in line with the 40% increase requested by the trade. There are also a comparison of journeys at Annex 3, and that shows you how the fares apply over a mile. Members have 3 options with regards to this report. Option 1 is ask officers to publish the variation of the table of fares proposed by the Hackney Carriage Associations, giving a specified period of 14 days for objections. Option 2, determine an alternative variation to the table of fares and ask officers to publish the variation determined by members, again giving a specified period of 14 days for objections. Or option 4, reject the request by the Hackney Carriage Associations. That's a brief overview of the report, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, if you've got questions, you want to raise your blue hands. Councillor Milling.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to double check that I'm understanding correctly. These increases are all either 4% or below.
That's correct.
Which is a real terms increase, that's above inflation. But
it is, as you will note from paragraph 9, the inflation at the end of December 2020 was 0.99%. The associations have asked for an increase of 4% because they've taken into consideration the increase that could have applied at the end of 2019, beginning of 20, of 2.91%. So they sort of added the two figures together and put in a request for 4%.
Okay, and this usually would only come to the committee if it's a real terms increase above inflation, and it hasn't come to the committee before. So going back even before 2018, it's always been in line with inflation or below, going back quite a few years.
Yes, this decision can be delegated to officers, but as the associations have requested an increase of more than the inflation suggested increase, we determined that it would be brought to members to agree to an increase or not.
Okay, and in considering this request, we only look at the inflation figures, the RPI transport indices figures. We don't look at any local figures to do with cost of living or anything locally, only national figures.
No, we only look at the transport figures, yes.
Okay, and that doesn't include, hold on a sec, it does include vehicle maintenance inflation figures, but there hasn't been any consideration of extra charges that Hackney Carriage drivers might incur because of changes that we introduce the local authorities do with emission standards and that sort of thing, which might mean that there's costs to do with upgrades to vehicles.
No, it doesn't, no.
And my final question was about what extra fees, additional charges can apply for. There's a list in paragraph 6 on page 10, which says an additional charge can apply for each item of luggage carried in the boot. Are like mobility aids and that sort of thing exempt from that?
Oh yeah, anything to do with the carriage of a wheelchair or anything like that cannot be charged for. When we talk about luggage, we're talking about a suitcase, something along those lines.
Okay, so if it was someone with limited mobility who uses a wheelchair but doesn't use it in the vehicle, they take it out, maybe fold it up or something, put it in the boot, they can't be charged for that?
No, they wouldn't be charged for an item like that, no.
Okay, and that's clear in the conditions, in the table of fares or whatever?
Yeah, we within the taxi licensing policy and within the guidance documents we give to all our taxi drivers, make sure they're aware of equality issues such as disability awareness and things like that, and what they can and can't do around those type of things, so that they know they can't charge for carrying a wheelchair in a vehicle.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hook.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if you have 5, 6, 7 or 8 passengers, then the 5th passenger is much more than 4% because it goes from £3 to £4.50 just for the first little bit, and that's far more than 60p. I mean, it's just that seems a bigger than 4% increase. It's okay if it's 8 perhaps, but not when it's the 5th, just 5, you know.
Yeah, a majority, that is the only one that is could be slightly more than the 4%, is the the additional passengers which they want to do the premium tariff for, but everything else is either the 4% or slightly below, because as you say, if you've just got the 5th passenger, it doesn't apply as much as if you have got the full 8 passengers in the vehicle.
Any follow-up on that, Councillor Hook?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how often they have 5 passengers, but sometimes it must be the sort that's like a minibus or an extra big taxi, I presume.
I imagine that's probably the reason. Is it, Leslie? It's to accommodate larger vehicles and the running costs of those?
That is it exactly, because of the fact the larger vehicles, you can fit more passengers in. So we do have a number of vehicles that seat up to 8 passengers, and they're the vehicles that, you know, students maybe decide that they would prefer to use, because there's a few of them that want to be transported about. But so we do have a number of larger seated vehicles.
Okay.
Good spot there, Councillor Hook. Councillor de Gorme.
Thank you. I want to ask a point on looking at Annex 3. It's sort of, it would appear that the proposals have been switched from metric to imperial measurements. I just wondered why we might be proposing that. And secondly, in terms of how the rates are applied, it seems very complicated, in as much as rather than changing, but there's an extra 10p on this flat rate charge, but then there's a 4% variation on the distance rather than changing the rates, which seems to me, you know, making it even more complicated than it needs to be. I don't know if you can explain that. The
fare chart is a very complicated document. When I first became taxi licensing, managed a taxi licensing service, and we had this very, very, very bizarre calculation in line with the fare chart that confused everybody. And we've moved away from that calculation now to try and simplify things slightly. The taxi trade put their proposal forward in yards. That was their decision to do that. The fare chart has always been in metres. Even Matt, as a weight and measures officer, we had to look into whether it should be in yards or metres, because yards is such an old measurement nowadays. So the published fare chart will be in metres, because we have always published our fare chart in metres. Right. So, but as I say, their proposal came to us in yards, and because I've included their fare chart proposal as an annex, I had to do the comparison of the two. So that's the reason why you've got it in metres.
So just to clarify that, is there a legal requirement? I'm aware that we have I think under the EU laws, we were allowed to keep 2 imperial measurements, which was pints for drinking in the pub and distance for road signs. So I don't know whether that's what it relates to. But just going back to the other point about the length of time, it seems as though, I mean, I'm sure that the technology is set up to make whatever calculations we want, but to actually tell a passenger that they get charged so much for the first 77.6 yards or 19.3 seconds of waiting time seems somewhat bizarre way of expressing it.
This is the fare chart has always been split between distance and time.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah,
but I'm just saying, in terms of adding the 4%, why are we not just increasing the rate by 4% and keeping the distance the same?
Actually, if you do the comparison on the distance, because of the fact of them doing it in yards rather than meters, the distance is actually quite tally, the same distance, even though but they may have doubled the the drop, each drop of the fare from 10 pence to 20 pence, but they've actually also doubled the distance you travel for that.
Okay.
20 pence. No, it looks confusing because it's 80 metres, which is virtually 168.2 yards. So they actually haven't changed the time. I found that confusing when I was first looking at comparing and doing my calculator has been going between yards and metres and getting very confused. But I think I got there in the end, that they do virtually tally.
So I just think that in terms of publicising this for any objections, it would be helpful to have some sort of narrative, just so that the general public understand the difference. If we're allowed to do that in a sort of unbiased as possible way, I think that would be helpful.
When we publish it, because we've always done our fare chart in metres, we will publish the distance in metres.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Norman.
Thank you. And Councillor Waters has his physical hand up for your information after I've finished as well. That's all right.
Got you, Councillor Waters. You're next.
Just a very brief one. I am assuming there is a typo on page 19, Annex 3, Tariff 3, unless 1066 yards is a particularly extravagant distance of time. I'm assuming that's supposed to read £6.20.
Oh, yeah, that's a very expensive journey.
It was my thought too. No other questions apart from that. Thank you.
It's those out of town journeys. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say earlier how pleased I was to actually see the carriage fares table on page 18 actually put in yards. It's a legal highway measurement, is miles and yards. That's what we should be dealing with. Now, whether you try to break down those figures in yards into fractions of a mile that most people will be able to understand would certainly make more sense than saying, well, we've always done it in metres, we should continue doing it in metres. It's a question of whether you were right when you were doing it in metres, when the legal highway measurement is miles and yards.
Any observations there, Leslie?
As I say, we as a council, the fare chart has always been published in metres. We're aware that road signs are, as Councillor de Gaunt said, in yards. But I don't know if you want to say anything on this, Matt, with your weights and measures hat on.
With my weights and measures hat on, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Councillor Waters is quite right. The legal measurement for, we retained yards for distance and road signs, etc., etc. You could put it in yards or a tenth of a mile, or however, if you felt that was more appropriate, you don't have to do it in meters. We've put it in meters because we've always put it in meters and to help that comparison. But Councillor Waters is quite right. If you think it's time for a change, it can be done legally.
Well, with respect, I think it ought to remain in yards, brackets, whatever fraction of a mile it relates to, which is legal and is perfectly understandable for most people.
Maybe when we get into the debate section in a minute, we could put that as a proposal, if that's what you want to put. Any last questions before we go on to debating it? Not seeing any more blue hands. Right, anybody want to debate or to make a comment? Lots of hands. Councillor Pearson.
Sorry, it was just a question. I've suddenly had a bit of a brain fog, and I'm just trying. Are we saying, for example, Tariff 1, the standard charges in the proposed table fares, that it would be £3 to travel 157.8 yards?
Yes.
So seems like quite an expensive. They all seem like quite expensive journeys, apart from Tariff 3, if that makes sense.
Is that just a general observation, or?
Well, I'm thinking a taxi from from York to Hackney for me would cost £10 to £15, and that's 4 miles, which would be I don't know how many yards that is. I should know, but it's certainly going to be about 6 kilometres, isn't it? 5 kilometres.
I think you're probably right, Ed. I think that's probably what it is. It's a bit like saying how much is a pint of milk, I suppose, isn't it? Which one you get or whatever else. But that's what we'll be setting for our Hackney carriages, which is obviously different to the private hire ones that set their own rates.
Tariff 3 seems to me to be the most sensible in terms of distance to cost.
Yeah, I think we'll approve it. We if I'm right, Lizzie, we approve en masse, or we could potentially tweak individual rates.
You could tweak rates if you wished, Chair, yes. You'd have to let me know how you'd like it to be applied.
I think we might need some accountants if we have to start tweaking individual rates. I thought I saw another hand up, but it might have gone down. Is there anyone else that wants to speak at this point in kind of debating? Oh, here we go. Councillor Millie.
Yeah, I had my hand up and I put it down because I didn't have anything to comment on that particular subject.
No problem.
I was going to propose something, but I think it looks like there's still people wanting to debate, so I'll hold off.
I've got no other virtual hands up. Is there anyone physically wanting to Councillor Waters?
Well, I was just trying to move it on, and I was just going to propose option 1, because if you look at the table on page 18 that we're being asked to approve, and then just compare it with the one on page 15, which has been charged since 2018. These people have got to make a living. As a licensing committee and as a council, we've been putting on more and more conditions as to the standard of all sorts of taxes and emissions and all the rest of it. We've just got to be realistic with this and approve option 1. The carriage fares as they stand. I would personally like to see it, and I would hope most committee members would, in yards, broken down in brackets as to the fraction of miles that it applies to, so that everybody can understand it.
Thank you. Councillor Millie, were you going to propose the same option?
Yes, I was going to propose option A, but I was going to ask if we could change the wording slightly, so that rather than just saying ask officers to publish in a local newspaper, the variation, I was just going to add ask officers to publish in a local newspaper and on the council website and from council social media platforms, just so that we're using whatever free, at no extra cost to the council, whatever free mechanisms we have to get the word out, because 14 days isn't a very long consultation period, especially if it's only published in one local paper.
Yeah, and I presume, Leslie, if we wanted to make it 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it's at our discretion. Is it the consultation? It's just a minimum of 14
That's
days?
correct, Chair. Yeah, it's just that it's minimum of 14 days.
Okay. Councillor Pearson, I've seen you just popped your hand up.
Is that me? Sorry, I've got 2 phone calls one after the other. I do apologise. Yeah, sorry, it's just clicked in my head. What's what? I got confused earlier. No, I'm happy to go with the 4% rise. I think that makes sense. When you, sorry,
It's fine.
Excuse me, I've got a jingle going. No, what I was going to say was that I think 4% makes sense. If you compound 2.98 or whatever it is, 2.91 compounded with 0.99, it's 3.90. We're talking a matter of 0.07. So yep. Happy to go with it.
Well, Councillor de Gorn, your hand was up.
Oops. Yes, I mean, given what's been said about the legal definition, I'd be happy to support Councillor Waters if that is what would make it clearer. I think the proposal from the trades makes it clear what a quarter of a mile, half a mile, or 3/4 of a mile is. My only reservation is in terms of when we're changing the rate, it would make more sense to express it as you can see in Annex 3, rather than the sort of changing the fractional distance or time each time. So, you know, you vary the price, but you express that for a quarter mile, half a mile, or tenth of a mile, or whatever it might be. You know, if you see what I mean. I don't know, that may be a departure from normal custom and practice, but in the interests of, as Councillor Mellon's expressed, I think we want to make it as simple as possible for people to understand what the charge is, and to relate that to where they might want to get a taxi to and from, and how much it's going to cost them.
Right, so Leslie, if I can summarise, we've got it proposed and seconded. 14 days, use of internet and other means, and in yards and meters. Is that possible for you to do that for us?
Just Councillor Norman's just raised his hand up. He wants to add anything.
Go on, Councillor Norman.
I completely agree with most of the proposal. I mean, I do think I have some sympathy with officers' position that we should produce it as it currently stands. From my understanding of the table in front, we currently produce it in meters and miles. So I struggle to see really where we're coming at from the perspective of legal distance, because it strikes me that the legal distance is already in there, as well as the measurement that is used by most people in this country for distance. But I'm happy to follow the whim of the committee on, and I don't want to get stuck down on a discussion on the metric system.
Yeah,
I'm not sure it's particularly relevant.
We might need a separate vote on what unit we're going to advertise it in. But are we all happy if we leave it to officers to try and advertise it in both units, or whatever we call that measure? Yeah. Just a show of hands then, please, to say we're happy with option 1. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Leslie. Well done on the work on that. It's mind-boggling. Right, so we said we're going to leave item 5. That's going to be put off to the next meeting when the police can attend. So back to you, Leslie, for update on licensed premises reopening, and hopefully picking up some of those comments we heard from at the start of the meeting.
Yes, Chair. This report is just an update for members. Members requested an update with regards to licensed premises reopening at the last committee, and so I'm having problems with my computer. A second, just hold on a minute. Don't you just love technology until it doesn't work? So, as everybody will be aware, the government announced in February the roadmap to reopening, well, basically lifting all of the restrictions, and it's a 4-stepped approach, with step 1 being implemented on the 8th and the 29th of March, and step 2 was implemented on the 12th of April. This step allowed outdoor hospitality to reopen. So prior to the 12th of April, council officers and partner agencies had several meetings to discuss the impact on the city centre and other authority areas of the authority for matters relating to licensed premises, with their outside areas going to be reopening. This also led to discussions regarding pavement cafe, provisions of additional seating areas, the pedestrian zone, litter and toilets, and a few other issues as well. And we also had similar meetings to this before the lockdown was lifted in July of last year. The Bid and Make It York have provided and are going to provide some additional seating across the city centre. You'll have seen the seating that's already provided in Parliament Street. Some seating is going to be provided in College Green and in some other areas across the city centre. Additional toilets have also been provided in Parliament Street, and there's also been bins provided across the city, especially in areas that we know that people have a tendency to take their off sales to sit and consume in some of our parks and open spaces. The provisions of the Business and Planning Act 2020 are still in place with regards to the off sale of alcohol, but at this time they're only in place until the end of September. We do not know if that provision is going to be extended at this time. So that provision allows any premises licensed for the on sale of alcohol to also provide it as an off sale. And any restrictions that are currently on a license with regards to the off sale of alcohol, for example, the off sale has to be in a sealed container, that those provisions no longer apply while the Business and Planning Act is in force. So that means any pub can sell a pint of beer in an open container and somebody can take that away as an off sale and consume it anywhere they wish. The provisions of the Business and Planning Act with regards to pavement cafe licensing have been extended until the end of March 2022. Our colleagues in Highways Regulations are responsible for issuing these licenses, and they have produced guidance which is available on the council's website. And this, with regards to the two public speakers, this does include accessibility requirements in line with the government guidance. To allow more pavement cafes to be more licensed premises to have pavement cafes in the city centre, Highways Regulations increase the hours and the areas of the pedestrianised zone. Officers within the Highway Regulations have been out and checked for compliance with the pavement cafes, and any issues they have found have been addressed. Public protection officers, along with licensing officers and the police, have been meeting regularly throughout the lockdown to discuss any issues relating to licensed premises, and we've taken a partnership approach with regards to enforcement. 6 fixed penalty notices have been served on 4 licensed premises for breach of the coronavirus regulations since the 23rd of March 2020. In some cases, to prevent further action being taken, licensed premises have voluntarily removed designated premises supervisors that were responsible for the premises when the breaches took place. Again, public protection, licensing and police officers wrote to all licensed premises prior to the reopening of premises after the first and third lockdowns, and joint visits were carried out. Officers have also taken part in operations with the police. One of these took place in the run-up to Christmas, which led to 60 fixed penalty tickets being served on people breaching coronavirus regulations. That was actually individuals and not businesses on that occasion. In the autumn, the council received funding with regards to enforcement issues. This funding paid for 6 COVID support marshals to be employed to engage and interact with people and businesses. They have interacted with over 860 businesses, 1,500 people, and given out over 170 pieces of PPE to people. They have also picked up over 1,400 discarded face coverings. And thankfully, we just got the news recently that the marshals have been extended to the end of December. As well as doing checks within the city centre, we have also been doing patrols and checks of licensed premises outside of the city centre and doing engagement again with these premises. On the 17th of April, 6 officers from Public Protection and Licensing worked, and we split the authority area up with some of us in the city centre and some of us going out in cars into the other areas to check and engage with licensed premises that were operating on that day. It hasn't always been easy to offer advice and guidance to the businesses. Since March 2020, Public Protection and Licensing officers have dealt with over 1,500 complaints and inquiries related to coronavirus matters, from which, well, it will be now over 511 businesses has received advice. It's been very challenging at times to offer businesses advice because the government has made an announcement but then 3 or 4 weeks later, we've actually got the regulations and the guidance. So we haven't known at the time of the announcement what the implications of that announcement have going to be. So that's been hard for us to be able to help some of the businesses, but we've got advice and guidance out to them as quickly as we could. Step 3 will be implemented no earlier than the 17th of May. This will allow indoor hospitality and entertainment and indoor and outdoor events to reopen. Once regulations and guidance is published, if required, further engagement will take place with licensed premises and event organisers. Step 4 will be implemented no earlier than the 21st of June, which will see remaining businesses, in such cases licensed premises that will be nightclubs, being allowed to reopen. One of the points again raised by one of the speakers was the fact that there are no implications mentioned within the report. That is because this is an update for members of this committee, and we are not asking members to make any decisions. That's a brief overview of the report, Chair.
Thank you, Liz. That's really helpful. And I think it just opened members' eyes. I'm sure they were not closed, but, you know, Leslie has a small team, a busy team that does a lot of different things, and just seeing the volume of inquiries alone would be significant. Never mind, we've had a huge amount of hearings, some quite complicated reviews and everything else. So my thanks, Leslie, for your team. And I've spent a few days out with Leslie in different offices, seeing what's been going on when we've gone through different stages of the lockdown opening. And actually, it's really positive to see the respect and the relationships that businesses have for Leslie and the police and other organisations. And there's a real positive approach to helping people, you know, and businesses to trade safely and be a welcoming place for people to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
No problem. So Councillor Melly is the first one with a hand up, but please put your hand up if you've got any questions. Councillor Melly, you first.
Thanks, Chair. And yeah, I'd like to echo your thanks to officers for a huge amount of work. I mean, just seeing these numbers, more than 1,500 complaints and queries, and advising more than 500 businesses, that's a huge amount of work. And yeah, it helps to keep us all safe and make sure that local businesses can thrive in what's been really difficult circumstances. So I really appreciate it. And I'm glad to hear the fundings. You now have the news that the funding's being continued for the COVID marshals, because it sounds like their work has been really great as well. I just had a couple of questions about future changes to legislation, because there's a couple of concerning looking things about changes. So the legislation for pavement cafe licenses has been extended to March next year, but the legislation to do with license and alcohol off sales has only been extended to September. So hopefully, do you know if that's going to change? Do you know when we might have the news of if that's brought in line? Because otherwise we're going to have a problem with premises that don't have an off license not being able to serve alcohol in their pavement cafe areas. If that's going to change, do you know when? And what planning is going on in case that doesn't change and we suddenly have the problem in September? A bit of a double whammy in that, one, there'll be lots of premises that suddenly then can't use their pavement licenses to actually serve alcohol, and just generally making sure all premises and all people, customers, are aware of that quite sudden change after quite a few months of being able to go and buy some alcohol and take it onto the street, and then that's suddenly changing, and there's suddenly being maybe a lot of enforcement work to prevent antisocial behaviour and make sure people are complying with their licenses if they don't have off licenses. Sorry, a bit of a rambly question, but just what preparations going on for that?
At this time, we don't know if there's any proposals for that to change. We're waiting. We hope that is the case. Or, as you say, there are going to be issues come the 30th of September with the fact that the off-sale provision is no longer allowed. If we're getting into September and there hasn't been any indication that there's going to be any changes to that act, we will have to start communicating with our licensed premises to make sure they are aware of that. We'll probably do what we've done with previous things. We'll put a letter out giving them all the information that they require at that time. We'll do engagement, and we'll also liaise with our colleagues in the comms team and ask them to do a comms message on that as well, because as you say, we can liaise with licensed premises, but we can't liaise with the general public. So we'll need to get that message out the best way we can so that everybody's aware, because even though pavement cafes will still be able to be used, you could sit there and have a cup of coffee and something to eat. It's just the alcohol side of things. If your pavement cafe is not already licensed for alcohol, that you won't be able to do that if the off-sale provision does come to an end at the end of September.
Just if I can come in there, Leslie, we did as a council, didn't we, before the government changed the laws, we did offer or make it easier for people to apply for off sales. Is that something that we would still look to do, do you think, if the government didn't do it, or is that just a temporary fix?
I think we'd have to consider what position we are in at that time. We did make some of the licensing processes as requested by the government as easy as possible with regards to letting people do minor variations, as long as there were no concerns about what it was they were going to do, and that we would maybe restrict the time limit that they could do that for. But that's something we would have to consider again if there was no indication from the government that there's going to be a change in the Business and Planning Act.
Thanks. Sorry, Councillor Melly, do you have any more questions? No.
Well, I do, but it's on a different subject, so I'll wait until other people have asked their questions who had their hand up already.
Councillor Norman?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the report, Leslie, which is very thorough as always. I appreciate and understand that there is a disconnect between some of what public speakers were talking about and what your team deals with, and I hope that the executive member for transport being here will mean that he's been able to listen to some of those concerns and queries. Just to sort of pick up on a point maybe that was made by one of them about putting business interests before licensing objectives. I would have assumed that you and your team would be enforcing standards very thoroughly, even if that enforcement was more of advisory first and then for thorough enforcement. Rather than putting a commercial interest before the licensing objectives themselves.
That's correct. We always, no matter what decision we make, the licensing objectives are always our priority, and a business interest is not our top priority at all. We have to consider the licensing objectives with every decision we make under the Licensing Act.
I think to be fair to the officer, that comment was in relation to kind of that first stage, I think, approach, wasn't it, Leslie, to, street cafe furniture that maybe has strayed or customers have moved it out, and, it was that kind of first warning, I suppose, but a soft one opposed to kind of shutting them down or revoking the license immediately.
Yeah, but I think it's worth making the point and stressing it, isn't it, that the interest of disabled residents comes into the licensing objectives quite firmly, I would argue, with regards to public nuisance and public safety and all of that stuff, and therefore is a really central part of what you and your team do generally.
It is with regards to my team, of course. The pavement cafe licenses are licensed under the Licensing Act 2003. Therefore, the 4 licensing objectives don't apply, I'm afraid to say. But if we were out doing our monitoring and there was alcohol in that pavement cafe license and it's been an off sale, we would still like to think that the licensing objectives have been complied with by that licensed premise.
I think just to say, we did try and get somebody at the last minute to come to speak from Highways, even though it isn't ours. We thought it'd be worth getting somebody, but we just couldn't get anyone in time, I'm afraid. I'm sure Councillor de Gorn, hopefully, like we said, is picking these things up, and we'll feed them back through his channels. Councillor de Gorn, your hand is next. You might want to mention something about that.
Well, yeah, I did want to acknowledge, obviously, the concerns that were raised by the public speakers, and I was glad to hear Leslie mention the fact that qualities assessment is part of the process that the Highways Department would go through. I think I can understand what their concerns, as you said, the implications section of the report does say no equalities implications, which you've explained is because there's not a decision to make before us, it's for noting. But nevertheless, I think a particular learning point is that just in just the way that you've described in here, the process that's gone through to get the pavement cafes into place. If an equalities impact assessment was part of that process, it would certainly be important to mention that in any future report like this, so that we do acknowledge the full range of considerations that have been taken by the Highways Department before anything's has been put in place. And just in terms of more specifics about the layout that you said, that needs to be communicated quite clearly to those with licenses about the 2 metre sort of gap that's needed for wheelchair users, and those sorts of things need to be spelt out as part of the process. Even though I accept what you just said, it's not necessarily something that the licensing department in this instance is focusing on, but as a council as a whole, we need to just make sure that the equalities implications are considered alongside those that any particular one department has a particular focus on. So it's not really a question, unless Leslie wants to sort of comment on that. It was just really observations on the comments from the public speakers and the response that Leslie gave about the fact that equalities impact is part of the process that has been gone through before these changes have been made.
I haven't had enough. I did get a brief update from colleagues in Highways. They haven't actually mentioned within their update if they did an equalities impact assessment, but I will raise that point with them, and we will share with them the points that were made by the speakers as well.
Thank you.
Chair, may I just add, colleagues from Highways, obviously, as we've said, they're best placed to answer these questions, but I do know that their procedure includes the government's inclusive mobility document and the recommendations in there that you need to have be mindful of. So they have gone through that process. It does include that, and I do know that last week they did some visits around the pavement cafes, and they were looking at issues like the tap rails to make sure that they were in place, and they were advising businesses where they weren't in place that they should be there, etc., etc. And they were checking to make sure that the chairs and tables were within the permitted boundaries, and obviously that should be give sufficient space to enable wheelchairs and pushchairs to pass through. Obviously, these things do get moved, unfortunately, from time to time, which was the very point of them going around to do their visits to check that all was in order. So it is something that I know they're aware of, but absolutely, as you say, we can pass back these comments to make sure they've got everything in hand.
Yeah. Councillor de Gore may even want to go out with these officers and go for a stroll around town and see Castlegate and a few other areas and see how it's going. That might be quite a nice afternoon. Right, who else? Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I know that there are staff at the barrier on Fossgate because of these sorts of things, so that there's a constant presence. My question is about something else, sort of on a theme that's slightly different. It was about in paragraph 7 where it mentions additional toilets being placed on Parliament Street. I've heard that there aren't any accessible toilets there. I can't remember if it was something that one of the public speakers raised. Are there any accessible toilets in those extra toilets on Parliament Street? And if not, can you tell us a bit more about why, in terms of why accessible toilets weren't procured?
Our colleagues I believe it was in the regeneration team that were looking at putting in additional toilets and the best location to put those. And from the information that we were given in a meeting last week, they couldn't get hold of a disabled toilet. There wasn't any available. They tried, but there was a shortage of disabled toilets. So I believe that's the reason why that there isn't a disabled toilet within the additional toilets that have been placed on Parliament Street.
What information is being given? Because I know that with the extension of the foot streets and that sort of thing, there was supposed to be information advertised about where there are accessible toilets available in the city centre. Has this been kind of done in line with that?
Are you aware of that, Matt?
Oh,
sorry, Councillor Digons.
I was in a meeting earlier on today with a subgroup of the BID, and as I understand it, there's additional signage has been agreed, and it may not all be in place as yet. But I was led to believe that was planned for the next week or so to have the additional direction, because I was asking the question about signage to toilets. And as Leslie said, that was the story that I've been given as well about accessible toilets for Parliament Street, that they had tried to procure them, but there weren't any available. So, I mean, I suppose the question then is whether the accessible toilets, which are not too far away on Silver Street, are being adequately signposted from those toilets. I've not been to look at the ones on Parliament Street as yet, but certainly that needs to happen.
Can anyone remember the toilet block that used to be on Parliament Street that got demolished? Can anyone remember if there was an accessible toilet there that we've lost and not been able to replace when toilets are needed?
There was its own accessible toilet. It was near Brown's. It was almost like a kind of little bird hut type thing with a disabled toilet in it.
Yeah, that was demolished. That's no longer there.
Mm.
They put in the additional facilities, as Councillor Digon has said, on Silver Street.
Yeah, so not far away, a few hundred metres or yards. Any other questions, Councillor Melling? No. Any other members? I'm not seeing any other hands.
Can I just jump in very quickly on a sort of supplementary on this? It strikes me as if the reply we're getting is that there weren't any available at this moment in time. Is that something that could be rectified?
Probably not for this committee, but I'm sure Councillor Duggan will take that back to his subgroup.
Well, I'm certainly happy to take it back. I think the main point, though, was that the temporary provision is for the period when access inside buildings is restricted. So, assuming the roadmap is followed and May the 17th, then that will become less of an issue once people can use facilities in pubs and restaurants.
Brilliant. Right, thank you, Leslie and Matt, for those answers, for those wide-ranging questions.
Councillor Mason, can I just say something very quickly?
Yeah.
Thanks, members, for your praise for the work that we've been done. And it hasn't just wanted to add that it hasn't just been my team that's dealt with over 1,500 complaints, because I think all of my team wouldn't have been able to cope with a single other thing if we'd had that many complaints. We have a majority of them have been dealt with by our colleagues in public protection. We have worked very closely with them if they're related to a licensed premises. But so I will also pass your thanks to the colleagues in public protection as well as my team, because as I said, they have done a majority of dealing with the complaints and inquiries that have come in.
Yeah, no, thank you. And the only other thing I might mention that probably we didn't say then, but there's obviously been instances of antisocial behaviour, and some of that has probably linked back to licensed premises in terms of things like sale of alcohol to young people. And Matt's team have been really quick on responding with trading standards visits to do test purchasing and deal with offences appropriately, from what I understand. So thank you, Matt, for that side of the team as well for responding to those issues. Right, that only takes us on to urgent business, which I have none of, but I will just say, obviously, we have been struggling for licensing hearing coverage, and we're having a novel approach on Thursday, and we're going to have a licensing committee at 5:30. So given some planning meetings go on for 4 or 5 hours, hopefully we're not going to set any records, but if we are struggling, it might be an option we look at more often. And then the other thing is probably that we'll probably see each other in person maybe at our next meeting in June. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Go on, Councillor Melly.
Sorry, an item of any other business. Can I ask whether officers are able to give us an update on the York Cars operators license appeal hearing? I believe a date's been set. Are we able to have an update on that now or in the future, please?
I'm not sure it quite goes as urgent business, but I think if you're just going to tell us when it goes to court, I'm sure that would be acceptable.
Thank you. I'd lower my hand. Yes, 1st of October and the 8th of October are the appeal dates. There's 2 dates and those are them.
Brilliant. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.